Well, hello and welcome to Applicata Biblia. My name is Mark, and thank you so much for stopping by as we get a little bit more into God's Word. I've been trying to uh, reconfigure and reformat how I make these videos, and I want to make them in PowerPoint. So I've been doing some lighting and some stuff, and I just got to a point where it's like, well, it's not perfect, but I just want to get this one done. So again, thank you for stopping by. We are in lesson 31 of a walk through the Bible, and we're going to be covering the life of Samson. Now, traditionally when we think about the life of Samson, we think of this great warrior, and he's always been depicted as this great guy, and how, you know, not only how strong he is, but how forthright and how righteous he is. And I'm not saying he's not righteous, but I am just going to say that he's kind of an interesting character that God chooses to use to be one of his warriors. He is, in a sense, one of the judges. It says that he judges Israel for 20 years, so okay, he's a judge. But he's really kind of this really base kind of guy, and by base I mean he is very much impulsive, impetuous, and you really question how much he might really respect or not respect God. It becomes a big issue in my mind as I'm watching this unfold. Uh, Israel is being oppressed by the Philistines still, right? So this is going to be a recurring theme with the Philistines. The Philistines again are a coastal people on the Mediterranean, and they are constantly battling with Israel, and this is just something that is going to be a problem for them all the time. So let's get into Samson. We're going to be covering 4 different chapters, but it's going to go relatively quick. Chapter 13 is where we start in Judges. Judges chapter 13. Let's read that. And the sons of Israel did evil again in the sight of Jehovah, and Jehovah gave them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. And there was a certain man of Zorah, the family of the Danites, and his name was Manoah. And his wife was barren and had not borne. And the angel of Jehovah appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, now you are barren and have not borne, but you shall conceive and bear a son. And now take heed, and please do not drink wine or fermented drink, and do not eat any unclean thing. For behold, you are pregnant and bearing a son, and a razor shall not go on his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to save Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And the woman came and spoke to her husband, saying, A man of God has come to me, and he was seen as an appearance of the angel of God, very terrifying. And I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, Behold, you are pregnant, and will bear a son, and now do not drink wine or fermented drink, do not eat any unclean thing, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb until the day of his death. Okay, so we're not gonna read this entire chapter, but when you look at this, we see that God is the one who's separating out Samson. It isn't, and this is something that we see that's a little bit different as far as Nazarites go. The Nazarite vow was established in the book of Numbers, and let me take a quick look, see if I can find that. Yeah, it's in Numbers chapter 6, And basically what a Nazirite vow is, and we actually even see Paul later on in the Christian era do this, talk about that. But what a Nazirite is it's a time where a person says, I'm going to dedicate myself only to God. And you take this vow, and you don't cut your hair. This is for men, and you don't cut your hair, and you don't drink anything, no wine, no grape juice. You don't even eat raisins, nothing like that. And this is so you can dedicate your life to God. It's like this holy service that you're going to do. And one of the other things is that you are not to touch a dead body or come near a dead body and become unclean. That was one of the stipulations. If during your service that happened, you kind of had to start your service all over again. So this is very unlike that. This isn't like that. This is still a guy who God is saying he will be separated out for my purposes. That's the main point of this. He is a Nazirite. But he himself isn't taking this Nazirite vow. It is actually thrust upon him. So that's the Nazirite, right? And how might we consider ourselves Nazirites? Well, of course, it's the same thing for Christians, right? We dedicate ourselves to God. That dedication pretty much takes place moving up to and then at the point of baptism, where we have this sort of dedication right to remit our sins. And at that point, we confess Jesus, our belief that he is the Son of God. And that is our stepping stone into Christianity, so to speak. Now, a lot of people say it's not. But you read your own Bible. Don't listen to what other people say. Just read it. Read Acts, and just come to your own conclusions. Everything else is made up. Okay, so in verses 8 through 23, Manoah is unsure of the visitation. He kind of questions it, and so he wants God to tell him what's going on, and this angel comes back again, the angel that visits his wife. It's interesting that they never talk about his wife's name. It's always, you hear about Manoah, but his wife is just his wife. That's kind of how they did things back then. But his wife sees this angel again, and the angel tells them to raise their son a Nazirite. He's asking, we wanted to ask you, what are we supposed to do with him? And they just say, well, just do what I tell you. Don't let him eat any grapes or have any grape juice or wine or raisins. And, that was it. That was the Nazirite vow for them, as far as God was concerned. It's not what you find exactly in Numbers, where it's a limited time. This is his whole life that God is going to use him, and we're going to see why that happens this way. So Manoah, gets this offering for this angel, and the angel, it burns up on this rock, and there's a smoke going up into heaven, and this angel goes up into heaven as well. And Manoah's going, oh, wow, that was Jehovah God. He was afraid that God's going to kill them. And his wife says, if he wanted to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted this offering. What are you talking about? She seems like a very smart person, and he's just kind of, I don't know what to do. What am I going to do? He's, he sees the character in each one of these people. Okay, so we're going to read a little bit of what's left in chapters 13 and the first part of 14. Chapter 13, starting at verse 24. And the woman bore a son, and she called his name Samson. And the youth grew, and Jehovah blessed him. And the Spirit of Jehovah began to move him in the camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. So God is directing where this warrior goes, right? And Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath, of the daughters of the Philistines, the enemy of Israel. And he came up and told his father and mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines, and now get her for me for a wife. And his father and his mother said to him, is there not a woman among the daughters of your brothers and among all my people, that you must go down to take a woman from the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, get her for me. Maybe. I just see him as this really impulsive person, for she pleases me very much. And his father and mother did not know that it was from Jehovah. So here God is using Samson's own inadequacies, his own, you know, uh, lack of self-restraint for his own purposes. He was seeking an occasion against the Philistines, so that's why God is allowing this. Obviously, they were not to be marrying Philistine women. That was not supposed to happen. Not certainly not a Nazarite. This is somebody who's supposed to be dedicating himself to God, somebody who's supposed to be doing that, just dedicating himself to God, not marrying some woman who can have some sort of idol, who knows what. For at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel. So explain the conflict between Samson and his parents. Was his request acceptable to God? And describe Samson's attitude. Well, the conflict is his parents are going, look, you know, there's lots of Jewish lasses you can marry. There's lots of Jewish ladies here. You can marry one of them. Please marry one of them. That's more appropriate. And he's like, I'll get her. I like her. That's the woman that I want. He's just out of control. When I read this, he's out of control. Am I on mine? Maybe I'm wrong. Uh, was this acceptable to God? Well, yeah, it was acceptable to God, but only because it was going to work against the Philistines who was oppressing Israel. God is allowing this to happen. And what is Samson's attitude? Well, Samson's attitude is he's being very carnal minded. He sees somebody who looks really good and he wants to marry her, and he doesn't care that it's a very offensive thing that he wants to do. He just doesn't care. Uh, in my mind, that's what's going on. I can't read his mind, but what he does reveals that, and so that's kind of how I see it. Okay. So when we get to chapter 14, Samson takes this foreign wife, and he's betrayed by his wife. And there's a whole story, and I would just suggest that you read these two chapters 14 and 15. We're going to kind of just breeze through them. But there's this whole story with a riddle and a dead lion with bees and honey in it and all these other things that happen. And his poor wife is threatened by these people, and she betrays him, and she's given to this other guy. And Samson kills 30 men because of this riddle that he gave them, and they got her. She got him to tell her what the riddle was, and then she told them what the riddle was, the answer to the riddle. And he got really angry and went and killed these 30 people and I think he killed them, this is the way it looks like, and takes all the stuff to pay the bet that he made. So he leaves and she's given to this other guy. And so that's going to play out. And he isn't happy about that either. In chapter 15, he finds out she was given to another man. He gets angry and gets these foxes and ties their tails together and lights them on fire, and they go running through the Philistine crops, and they're burning down all these crops. So here's God using this guy who's just a rogue. He's just really impetuous. He's very much self-centered. It kind of just acts on his own carnality and that sort of thing. He's very angry. He does these things, and He knows he's supposed to be going against these things, but he just doesn't seem to be uh, godly. He isn't acting very godly in my own mind. Okay, but so Samson's own people want to turn him over to the Philistines because they're looking for him, and they're like, hey, you know, these people are looking for you, and we need to turn you over. And he's like, yeah, okay, well, you don't do anything. So they go do this meeting to turn him over. He ends up getting this jawbone of a donkey, and he kills 1,000 of the Philistines. So this is God judging the Philistines for oppressing his people. And we have to remember uh, his people aren't being very good for him right now. They're committing a lot of idolatry, and even this guy who's supposed to be helping is very much not a godly man. So that shows you how far Israel has slid away from Moses and what Moses and Joshua and Caleb were able to establish. Okay, in chapter 15, 17 through 20, Samson said with the jawbone of a donkey and a heap, 2 heaps with the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. And it happened when he finished speaking, he threw the jawbone out of his hand, and he called that place Jawbone Height. And he was exceedingly thirsty and called to Jehovah and said, surely you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. And now I am dying with thirst and will fall into the hand of the uncircumcised. And God broke open the hollow place which is in Lehi, and water came out of it. And this is kind of like when they were in the desert. And he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore, its name is called the Fountain of the Praying One, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So, what is Samson's attitude here? Well, when I read it, it's really hard for me not to project a sense of irreverence that he might have towards God. Just, he knows that he is chosen by God. He goes and slaughters 1,000 people, and you just don't see this meekness or humility toward God, where he says, "My Lord, I am thirsty. Can you give me some water?" He's, "Look what I did. I killed these 1,000 men, and now I'm thirsty. Where's my water?" That's how I read it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But Samson just seems to lack some of the more finer things of a godly man that we find later in Jesus, and how he portrays how it's supposed to be. Okay, so let's read chapter 16, and I think everybody knows that chapter 16 is the story of Samson and Delilah and how that works. Samson went to Gaza, saw a woman there, a harlot. So here's this guy who's supposed to be separated out for God, and he's going to a harlot. Okay, you know what I'm saying? This is the like what? Okay, I don't that word Nazarite. I don't think it means what you think it means. And he went into her, and the Gazites were told, saying, Samson has come here. And they encircled and set a trap for him all the night at the gate of the city, and kept quiet all night, saying, until the light of morning, and then we will kill him. And Samson lay down until the middle of the night, and rose up in the middle of the night, and he took hold of the leaves of the gate of the city. He grabs the gates of the city, which are these huge gates that would let carriages through, and horses and stuff. They were huge, and on the 2 side posts, and plucked them up with the bar, and put them on his shoulders, and took them to the top of the mountain. That is in Hebron. And it happened afterward that he loved a woman. So that was just something that happened. And again, that just kind of reveals his character and who this guy is. Very carnal. And it happened afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, and her name was Delilah. And the Philistine rulers came to her and said to her, so she is associated with the Philistines again. And this is God infiltrating with this very sort of debased, sort of carnal guy who is Samson. Now, he is righteous because he is working on God's behalf, but he's not righteous in his attitude, in my mind, toward God. The Philistine rulers came to her and said to her, entice him, see uh, where his great strength is, and by what we may prevail against him, so that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will surely give to you 1,100 pieces of silver. And Delilah said to Samson, now tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound in order to afflict you. So she comes straight up and asks him, what can I do to hurt you? Weird, right? Maybe it was a little bit different. I don't know. Maybe a little more trickier. Maybe Samson was just dumber than a rock. I don't know. And Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 bowstrings which have not been dried, then I shall be weak and shall be as any man. And the Philistine rulers brought to her 7 fresh bowstrings which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. And the ambush was sitting for her in an inner room. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he broke the bowstrings like a thread of tow when it smells fire, and his strength was not known. And Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have trifled with me and have told me lies. Now, please tell me with what you may be bound. And he said to her, if binding, they bind me with new ropes, by which no work has been done, then I shall be weak and shall be as any man. And Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And the ambush was sitting in the inner room, and he tore them off his arms like thread. Oh, go figure. So at least he's smart enough to not tell her, right? And Delilah said to Samson, until now you have trifled with me and have told me lies. Tell me with what you may be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 braids of my head with a web. And she fastened it with a pin and said to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he woke out of his sleep and pulled out the pin and the hand loom and the web. And she said to him, how can you say I love you, and your heart is not with me these 3 times? You have trifled with me, and have not told me where your great strength lies. And he told her all his heart and said to her, no razor has come on my head, for I am a Nazarite to God. So there's the secret. From my mother's womb. If I were shaved, my strength would go away from me, and I would be weak and would be like any of men. And Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, and she sent and called for the Philistine rulers, saying, come, for this time he has told me all his heart. And the Philistine rulers came up to her and brought the silver in their hand. And she made him sleep on her knees, and called for a man, and had him shave 7 braids of his head, and began to afflict him, and his strength departed from him. And she said, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he awakened from his sleep and said, I will go out and shake myself free as time after time. But he did not know that Jehovah had departed from him. And the Philistines seized him and bored out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. And they bound him with bands of bronze, and he was grinding in the house of prisoners. But the hair of his head began to grow, for he had been shaved. And the Philistine rulers gathered to offer a great sacrifice to their god, Dagon, and to exult. And they said, our God has given us our enemy Samson into our hand. And the people saw him and praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered our enemy into our hand, even the devastator of our land, who multiplied our wounded. And it happened when their heart felt good, they said, call for Samson, and he shall entertain us. And they called for Samson from the prison house, and he entertained them, and they made him stand between the pillars. And Samson said to the young man, grasping his hand, let me alone, and let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean on them. And the house was full of men and women, and all the Philistine rulers were there. And there were about 3,000 men and women were on the roof watching Samson entertaining. And Samson called to Jehovah and said, O Lord God, remember me I pray, and please make me strong only this time, O God, and I shall be avenged with one vengeance on the Philistines because of my 2 eyes. And Samson grasped the middle pillars on which the house rested and on which it was supported, one with his right hand and one with his left. And Samson said, "Let my soul die with the Philistines." And he bowed mightily, and the house fell on the rulers and all the people who were in it. And the dead that he killed in his death were more than those he killed in his life. And his brothers and all his father's house came down and lifted him up and brought him up, and they buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, and the burying place of his father Manoah, and he judged Israel 20 years. Okay, so you probably already know that story, but yeah, this is like the redeeming. This is the redemption, right? This is a redemptive story. Here's a guy who seemingly is just taking his the power that God has given him for granted and just doing things that are ungodly. I'm assuming that he had to know that a godly person doesn't go after prostitutes and that sort of thing. That's ridiculous. Why would you do that? But it didn't matter to him, and that's the problem, right? And I don't know why he was like that. We just know that he was. He was just full of testosterone, maybe. I don't know. But there are several things in there that we need to see, I think. What lessons do we learn in this chapter? Obviously, the man was arrogant. He became arrogant because he knew God was giving him this power. I'm assuming he knew. And unfortunately for him, it worked against him because he became arrogant. And there are other things in there that we can see as well. Most specifically, in my mind, when I read that story, I remember as a young child, the Samson story. You didn't see Samson wasn't like this guy. Samson was a nice guy in the movies. He was always, big and strong, but he was also very nice. He was respectful and that sort of thing. And this guy doesn't seem that respectful to me. But what we see here is that he knows God is with him, and he really has a bad attitude. In my own mind, right? Again, it's just the way I read it. It's like, dude, you got a bad attitude. When God is doing things for us, it should provoke our humility. And again, this is what Jesus brings out, and this is part of this series. All these stories point towards Jesus. Jesus absolutely reveals the good attitude that a person has when it comes to, loving God. We don't. God doesn't owe us anything. He doesn't owe it to us. He wants us to be his children. And he has done everything that he has to do to show us that level of love that he has for us. And that is what should be drawing us to him. And when we get knowledge, it's really easy to become arrogant with that knowledge. It's very easy. When Paul is addressing, much later in the New Testament, when Paul is addressing one of the cities, churches, they are so arrogant towards one another. They think, being a Christian is great, but they also think, well, who baptized me? I'm taught from this preacher. And the other guy would say, well, I was taught from this preacher, and he's better. And they thought they were better than one another. And Paul had to set. If you ever want to read a good rendition of issues that can happen with arrogance within churches, that's the one is 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And Paul deals with that. God gives us knowledge not so we can go around bashing people over the head with it, but so that we can offer his invitation to become his children. That's all there is to that. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I really love the story. And I hope I didn't sound like I was bashing him too much. I mean, this was, it's a very interesting read in my mind to see what can happen. And his job was not easy. His job was to go around and defend Israel. And that meant fighting, hand-to-hand combat, and killing. So maybe that just makes a person a certain way. And maybe I'm reading it all wrong. I don't know. If you think I am, you can let me know what you think. But in the end, we see the redemption part of it. And that's the Christ part of it, is the redemption. Eventually, once he's humbled, once God leaves him, he's humbled. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you in the next one.